All right, welcome in to another episode of Buzzbeat, the Charlotte Hornets podcast. This is Brian Geisinger. I'll be joined today on this draft edition of the pod by Lee Branscombe and Spencer Percy, as usual. Richie Randall on the ones and twos producing. Spencer will be here momentarily. We're all kind of rushing to finish up with work, and perhaps even some of us battling vaunted Raleigh Durham or Charlotte traffic. I'm battling allergies today. I'll just say that too. Allergies were tough in the triangle. So if I sneeze or look like a buffoon on the video, feel free to make fun of me, but just know it's not entirely my fault. So yeah, please feel free to chime in. We would love to hear from you guys, comments. I know this is like a pretty exciting time for the Hornets. The draft is, let me check my watch here, June 22nd. So we're about 4 weeks out from the actual day, and now having the lottery behind the NBA. We know at least before some of these trades what the order is going to look like. And the other week we found out, Lee, that the Hornets are coming into the 2023 NBA draft with a multitude of picks, but following the lottery, the number 2 overall pick, drafting behind the San Antonio Spurs with the red carpet rolled out for Victor Wembanyama. So before we get into all of that, Lee, how are you doing here, man?
I'm good, BG. It is like you said. I mean, there isn't like a ton going on right now with the Hornets, but this one thing gives us so much to talk about that I think fills the space and more. I guess I'm just wondering, like, what kind of espionage and rumors do we have to get started so that the Spurs pass on Wemby and the Hornets get generational luck at number 2? What can I do on the Twitter machine to like fire that up?
I think what you would need, I think the only thing that would work was you would need some you need someone that's that comes down on the Hooper side of the Hooper versus basketball player
Ooh,
debate to be
ooh, that's
pushed
the
into the
angle.
front office of the Spurs, because then there's maybe a chance that Scoot goes one after seeing his mid-range package on full display, and then Victor Wembanyama falls to 2. But no, short of that, I think Wembanyama's leg could fall off in the next 3 weeks, and he still might go number 1. He also had another just dominant performance a couple of days ago too. Like, the guy is just
Unreal.
he is a hell of a prospect. And Spencer and I talked about this a little bit on the last episode. I don't love some of he's the best prospect since LeBron, or he's the best prospect since ever, or since Lou Alcindor.
In team sports history.
There's no way to there's no like credible way to measure that,
No.
really. And we'll just say that about like every election is going to be the most important election of our lifetimes. Every draft will be the most important draft. Like, it's just we have to in the moment like sensationalize these things. But like, he's obviously the real deal, and he's going to be an incredible player.
Well, and I
For
would say, like, I don't think, like, if you've been a listener of this podcast through draft season in the past, like, neither you or me is shy about having a contrarian take here or there. But like, even my like
Yeah.
contrarian brand, like, there's just nothing. I mean, he is. I think it would be fair to say that he is one of the best prospects in the past 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
Now, whether AD, LeBron, Zion. I mean, these are all
Right.
unbelievable prospects at the time of their drafting. He's in that group-ish, I would say.
It really does feel like even people that are paid, people in the media covering the draft, like, it feels like a lot of people forgot about Zion pretty quickly.
Oh,
It really wasn't that long ago.
no.
Some of Zion's teammates from college at Duke are still playing college basketball, and like, we've just already completely just like back shelved how insane the sweepstakes for him were. I do think there's some difference between an NCAA prospect and an
Sure.
international prospect, at least in terms of how those players are going to be covered and how I think at least the domestic NBA fans are going to sort of be able to pay attention to that. Although it does seem like with Wembanyama that and maybe this was a one-off, or maybe this will be just like the new thing for when you have like a top 5 prospect like this. It does feel like things started to shift. Like his games were on NBA TV. This guy uh,
Yeah.
been a part of even I think casual fans. Um, you know, um, understanding of scouting in the draft for at least 6 or 7, if 9 months, if not, maybe a little bit longer than that. But enough with the preamble here.
The
The
plus.
Hornets have the number 2 pick, which means they have their choice of the board after after Victor Wembanyama. And it did kind of feel like after they landed the number 2 pick that night, that there was, I think the Hornets could have felt good, certainly landing inside the top 3, landing inside the top 4 even, and not falling back to 5 all the way that Detroit Pistons did, who entered the night with a 14% chance, tied for the best odds of getting the number 1 overall slot. But it did feel like and I thought sort of for a period of time that this had been trending like who's the number 2 overall prospect in the draft after it being like ironclad Scoot consensus, last fall and winter, that it
Yeah.
did kind of feel like through the course of the college basketball season and just the way some media and talking heads around the draft had sort of began discussing a prospect like Brandon Miller, like that there had been not just some momentum for Miller, but it seemed like he had maybe even usurped Scoot in the minds of some as the number 2, as like the clear cut, number 2 overall prospect in the draft. That's not how I see it, to be clear. Like I think I've for months now I've made my opinions on Scoot Henderson felt. In Lee, I mean, you and I last September we did a full hour-long episode on Scoot, and then when we did our multi-part episode on Wembanyama in October, we talked a little bit about Scoot too, because that was after their duel in the desert in Vegas, which was really like one of the most fun basketball things that probably happened this calendar basketball season. But look, I think everyone in Hornets land now, like this is going to be the topic of conversation for the next couple of weeks, the next month, basically. Like it really is going to be Scoot versus Brandon Miller, or Amen Thompson. He's a phenomenal prospect, and he's probably would be number 3 on my big board above Miller, actually. But we are going to start this, like, again, everyone's talking about this, but we'll sip from the same Kool-Aid here, and we're going to go ahead and get in today and discuss Scoot, discuss Brandon Miller, and then maybe do a little bit compare, contrast, and sort of explain why we would have those guys valued, why we would have one valued above the other. And there's no, I mean, I know how I feel. There's no right or wrong, answers here. And again, I'm not sure if it doesn't look like Spencer's quite jumped in yet. But okay, let's go ahead and just, Lee, you and I have done this before, but why don't we get in with the Scoot Henderson scouting report? For those who aren't in the know at this point, 6'2" guard, 6'9" wingspan, in a terrific lead guard prospect. Unbelievable athlete, especially if you want to narrow it to the like the point guard, the lead guard, small guard demographic. Insanely quick, elite burst, good first step. It has the ability to get skinny and get into gaps and get into pockets of space. And that's something he showed across even his first season playing with the G League Ignite. But I think a little bit different in year 2 was it did seem like he had bulked up some this year. Like he's really well built, not just for a young guard, but for a young guard that has a pretty impressive wingspan as well, +7 reportedly. And he can use, like, I do think that strength, the added strength, has made him an even more dynamic downhill driver. because he already had pretty good body control. He was already explosive, but now he has the ability to, push guys off and get a little bit of added space around the rim and in the lane. He has the ability to, I think, even access tougher spots around the rim. And that's where, it's where not the majority, but a lot of his shots have come this season. So I guess that was maybe one of the first things that jumped out for me in year two with Scoot. I guess sort of like taking the 20,000-foot view, what was maybe the biggest change you noticed, if any, from year one to year two with Scoot Henderson? Of course, getting to play, in terms of percentage share, more time on the ball, more playmaking responsibilities with this G League Ignite team, not having to share some of that with guys like Dyson Daniels and Jaden Hardy.
Yeah, I mean, he was certainly more featured, obviously, this year, as he should have been. I mean, there were a lot of moments last year where you'd be kind of watching the prospects for G League Ignite, Hardy and Foster and Dyson Daniels and that whole crew they had last year, and it's just like, man, who the hell is this Scoot kid? I mean, he was just dynamic and impactful almost every time he came on the floor. Um, I think the one thing I wanted to kind of like highlight in the Scoot discussion is kind of this, conversation around like his fit with LaMelo Ball. And BG, I know we've talked about this in the past together, and I think it's worth kind of like re-earthing a little bit because it is out there, like this kind of this overall question. And I'm with you in the fact that, like, if there are Hornets fans, if there are personalities on Hornets Twitter that prefer Brandon Miller to Scoot Henderson, I don't think that that's a ridiculous opinion. I do fall on the other side of that camp, but I can understand how someone would get there rationally. Like Brandon Miller, he is an awesome prospect.
Mm-hmm.
I do think his the highest ceiling of Brandon Miller's archetype is probably slightly higher than Scoot Henderson's. I just think that there's a lot more risk involved with Brandon Miller than there is with Scoot Henderson. And I think that there's two dynamics here that in my mind, two of the biggest dynamics in my mind that allow the fit with LaMelo Ball. Number one is because LaMelo has become such an awesome shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Like that ahead of schedule development for LaMelo allows him to coexist with a guard like Scoot much more harmoniously in my mind. And then number two is the fact that I believe that Scoot Henderson can be an elite point of attack defender with his instincts, with his size, with his strength, with his quickness, with the way he plays on the defensive end. I think honestly, it's in a fantastic marriage. And then you kind of like sprinkle in the imagination and hopefulness as Hornets fans could start to think about those two in transition and playing off of each other. With LaMelo's brilliant passing, with Scoot's dynamite athleticism and physicality, like I just kind of want to like put it out there that with the caveat of I get it if you prefer Brandon Miller, that's not insane by any means, but the question out there about whether Ball and Henderson can play together, I think is super overblown. Like they can absolutely play together.
Yeah. Like with all of my thoughts and analysis on Scoot, a guy that I've covered and watched pretty intently for almost a year and a half, 2 years now. Like it doesn't mean I don't think Brandon Miller isn't like a stud prospect. Like he's really really good. And if I were in charge of a team drafting fourth or fifth, I would be like very excited to have a player like Brandon Miller fall to me. We can get into some of that more, but just talking about the hypothetical fit with Scoot and LaMelo, like for one thing, the Hornets, they're not drafting for fit or for position right now. Like they should be in a position to just take the best prospect available, right? And if for whatever reason you got to the conclusion that Brandon Miller was a better prospect than Scoot Henderson, I would disagree with that. But that's who you should take, right?
100%.
But hold on one second. Sorry. With that said, Sorry, I had a call just came in there, interrupted my flow a little bit.
Get
But
ya.
yeah, like there's also no like I've even seen like John Gavoni from ESPN sort of float the notion of, well, the Hornets are, you look at their wing rotation and it's really, really bad. So they should look into they should draft wing, they should draft position for position. And like again, not only are the Hornets like should that not factor into the calculus, right? Like they just need to take the best player available. One, it's a similar thought process that got the Warriors to take James Wiseman over
That's so
LaMelo
true.
Ball, which is why the Hornets have LaMelo Ball. If LaMelo Ball wasn't on this roster, just think about how dark the guard room would look too.
Ooh.
Like it's really just one player doing all of the heavy lifting there. And then if the Hornets had gotten the number 1 pick, I know Wembanyama's in his own category as a prospect, but can you imagine someone covering the draft going on and saying, well, the Hornets drafted Mark Williams. They just signed Nick Richards to an extension. They're kind of deep at the center position, but man, that wing rotation's not looking good. They should probably take Brandon Miller number 1 overall. Like I know it's not apples to apples, right? But like the same logic applies. Yes, they don't have many good wings on this roster. They're a bad they're a bad NBA team. Like no duh. The way you try to hopefully long-term rectify that is by taking the most talented players with the biggest upside at your draft slots, which again, my opinion, that is Scoot Henderson. As far as the fit goes with LaMelo Ball, I've talked about this a lot. LaMelo, 41% career catch and shoot guy. You can take down Spencer said it, and we need to introduce Spencer because I believe he's here now too. But LaMelo Ball is a guy that, as good as he is on the ball, and you still want him on the ball a ton, where he does struggle is the downhill finishing, being able to constantly create advantage, get to the rim, finish through contact, put pressure on the rim. Like he is a generational passer. He's a good pull-up shooter, and he is an unbelievable like processor of the game of basketball. But that doesn't mean he needs to run 100 pick and rolls per game. And in fact, having a guy that you could come in, give some of those ball handling duties to, and let LaMelo get off the ball as a mover, as a relocation shooter, as a guy that can be a connective passer, cutting into space, hitting ahead in transition, would be like a dream kind of like outcome, I think, honestly, for LaMelo. Those guys are friends, mind you, is something that I think Jonathan Gavoni mentioned the other week. They're both, I think, Puma shoe guys, if that matters at all as well. The other thing I would say is right now, Scoot Henderson is not a good 3-point shooter, but he is a pretty good mid-range shooter. There are reasons, I think, given a year or two, to think that he's going to develop into a pretty good 3-point shooter. And he too is a very good passer, not like LaMelo, right? LaMelo's sort of like special in this regard, but Scoot Henderson is a good passer as well, and a guy that can do some stuff already off the basketball as a teenager. So if you are worried about fit, I think there are ways you can make it work, like even next season. If that is a concern, I still think like long term, you have to be thinking about this longer term. And I think that like it gets even easier as LaMelo gets stronger, as he improves, and as Scoot becomes a better shooter. But with that in mind, Spencer, I think you're here with us, and apologies it took me so long to ramble through and get to you here. But how are you doing, sir? Welcome in. And yeah, any thoughts, just sort of like broadly speaking, on Scoot versus Brandon Miller at 2 for the Hornets?
Hey guys, thanks for having me on your show.
There he
I
is.
appreciate it. It's great to be here. Sorry for
First
the
time, long time.
yeah late arrival. Sorry about that. I am here. I can't figure out my camera. Sometimes I feel like I'm 35 years old. I made fun of old people for a long time, specifically my father and father-in-law, about technology, and I'm like, I'm becoming them slowly but surely. So sorry about all that.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. Yeah. Thoughts are, BG. I think we text earlier this week, probably in the group text, like you mentioned it, during lottery night, that this thing was going to pick up steam, Scoot versus Miller. I didn't anticipate it would happen that quickly. So that's been a little surprising to me. And the reports around, all the buzz in the gym at the combine was, Hornets are definitely taking Miller, all this stuff. Like I was kind of caught off guard about a lot of that. But I mean, I think the same thing we talked about in the last pod, where I think Scoot and LaMelo are a super intriguing fit together. And I think, honestly, from a franchise perspective, the most intriguing aspect of drafting Scoot is that you have a bridge, to the next version of the franchise if LaMelo doesn't want to be here, right? So his age is just, you can't ignore it, and it's the same position that LaMelo plays in a way, certainly if he's not here. But I don't know. I mean, I like Brandon Miller. I think he's a really good player. I don't think the Hornets can go wrong, or any team for that matter, by drafting him. But it's impossible to ignore that the ceiling of Scoot Henderson, in my opinion, is just higher than Brandon Miller's. But again, that's not to say I don't think Brandon Miller's a really, really good prospect. I would also add that I don't think that the Hornets should be in the business of taking on a PR situation like Brandon Miller's. Now, that kid is probably 100% innocent. I have no idea. Okay. But a small market like Charlotte, I wouldn't have a huge appetite of taking on another situation like that. Considering sounds like we're trending towards bringing back Miles Bridges. And apologies if you guys have already covered this in the first few minutes.
No, we didn't hit on Bridges yet. I know BG and Richie talked about it when the news came out a few weeks ago. So you can certainly go back and check that episode out. We did cover the news when it happened. Yeah, I mean, look, so there's a couple comments. I mean, Dre says both Scoot and Miller have superstar potential and skills. I agree with that, actually. Like I do think there is a best version of Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson. Like, individually, their best versions are all NBA players. I think, from what I've scouted and from what I've seen, I just think, like I alluded to this a little bit earlier. I do think there's more risk involved with Brandon Miller. I mean, for every Brandon Ingram of his archetype, there are 3 Kevin Knox. So like there is this kind of long development arc with these massive, rangy, skinny, kind of offensive-minded wings. Now, and Adam is commenting about how Brandon Miller had a bad NCAA tournament, which he did. But that doesn't necessarily doom you as a prospect by any means. I mean, we could certainly probably quibble with the rookie year that Jabari Smith had, but he came on pretty strong late, and he had a terrible NCAA tournament. I do think, BG, I'm curious, would you have said that Scoot Henderson would have gone number 1 last year over the likes of Jabari and
Paolo?
And
Chet.
Yeah.
I think yes. I think he would have, and I was pretty clear on Paolo as the number 1 overall prospect. I had him 1. I had Chet 2. I had in Jabari 3. With Jaden Ivey sort of nipping at his heels, and that's close to how it played out. Obviously Sacramento went Keegan Murray, and he had an awesome rookie season. So, but yeah, no, I think Scoot would have gone. I think he would have gone 1. Just I do think like the athleticism is, or who knows, like maybe like. I'll pull out my own reasoning with Paolo. It's like, don't overthink like 6'10", 250-pound, teenager that can pass, dribble, shoot, and like process like in court map, So maybe not. Like maybe it's not a no-brainer. That Scoot would have gone above him. But I do think with like the lead guard with that type of athleticism, pretty rare, something you don't see every year. I do think it's something that probably would have given Scoot like a slight edge, if you can make that comparison. And if Scoot could have also gone in the draft last year, I mean, he would have been doing it as an 18-year-old, which would have been like another feather in his cap. I think it's interesting that seeing some of the stuff that, like, I read what Jonathan Wasserman at Bleacher Report published a couple of days ago, which is sort of similar to some of the stuff coming from ESPN of just like, it does seem like the Hornets are leaning to Miller at 2. I just kind of, and I addressed sort of my frustrations already with like using position type, using fit with LaMelo, like using those types of reasonings to not have Scoot above Miller. Like I've sort of expressed that. I did find it was interesting in Wasserman's piece that one, he mentioned how Scoot hadn't played in a couple of months. He had missed time at the back half of the season with an injury, and had after this great game out in Vegas against Wembanyama, like maybe he hadn't been as impressive. Like I would push back a little bit on that notion. Like I just watched a game he had against the Memphis Hustle probably like 2.5 months ago, from late February, where he was awesome in a game where he was being guarded by Zaire Williams, and there were a lot of like NBA to NBA fringe NBA guys on the court on both sides in that game. And that Miller did, after being like really good for like the meat of the season, like Miller like didn't have a good postseason for Alabama. So and that was a season that ended 2 months ago too. So to assume that he scored 20 a game and shot 42% from three and like led Bama to the title game, and that's what's giving him some boost. Like I find that didn't happen. So again, it does feel like some of this stuff is sort of coming out of left field a little bit. And then to also, one of the other things in Wasserman's piece was him talking about like maybe NBA draft types and personnel people like not having a good feel for the G League game and the G League Ignite. It's like, I don't know, man. Like it's year 3. This isn't a new endeavor. This is Scoot's second year playing in it. And this is a league that's going against, like NBA to fringe NBA type competition. Like if anything, I think it should be like the cleanest simulation between as far as you can get for evaluating a prospect before they get to the NBA. I don't think it should be any sort of like murkiness with evaluating the G League Ignite compared to a team that plays in the SEC versus a team that plays is a pro team in France. Like you're going to have difficulties for sure with all of these things. I just don't know why that would be like some small fogginess with evaluating the G League would be the thing that would cause you to like, second guess yourself on Scoot. Like there's stuff with him where not only can you look at the numbers, but like just watch the film. Like the end of the day, it's basketball, and certain traits that are gonna translate. And then the last thing I would say, Spencer, and you can jump in right after I get through this, but like Gavoni seemed to be floating on the low post with Zach Lowe the other week that like maybe some of Charlotte's front office types are sort of like would be thinking more short term for their own jobs, and for that type of stuff. Like one, I would second guess, I would question, whom is going to actually have a bigger impact next season. I know Miller's older, but I do think there's some things Scoot's going to do just immediately as soon as you put him on the court. But also, like, if that's the case, then like that's a lot of bad faith. If that's true, that's a lot of bad faith in terms of like the decision making process. And my hope would be, if that's true, my hope would be that Scoot Henderson has like a Hall of Fame career. Like I'll be pulling for all of these. I want all these guys to come in and do well. But like if guys are going to use sort of like if they're going to sort of like question the science of the draft process, and if they're going to be sort of like looking out for themselves more than just like taking the best prospect, then I hope they get burned. And I would hope that would be sort of like a black mark on their career moving forward. So what say you, Spencer, with some of the other sort of like noise that's picked up steam between Scoot and Brandon Miller here?
Hey, before you get to that, Spencer, we've had a guy in our Twitter space who's been patient. Speaker request here for Saul. So I don't know if he has a comment or a question, but go ahead and jump in here, Saul.
Yeah, I just want to make it really simple. I guess I'm not going to be heartbroken if we take one or the other, but I personally think Scoot is a lot closer to Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook, where Brandon Miller might be closer to Josh Jackson. So I personally take the kind of psychotic athlete.
I mean, Saul's like not wrong. Like it is
Yeah, that's
generally speaking good to bet on special athleticism in these types of like practices. And that's something that again, Henderson is an elite track star, vertical athlete at the guard position.
well, something I've thought a lot about with Brandon Miller too is the system he played in, the guys that he played with. I mean, Alabama flies up and down the court, and a lot of advantageous situations Brandon Miller was given in that system. And I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I think he's a really good prospect, but I do think that there is more downside to him than Scoot. So I agree with what BG has said, and I agree with what Saul just said. I think what's interesting, BG, if we can play theoretical for a second, if the Hornets really are, if these reports are true and they actually are leaning towards taking Brandon Miller, what they should really start to lean into is get Scoot Henderson in for a private workout, individual workout rather, float how much they love him, and get Portland or whoever, they need to move down to 3 because there's a lot of teams that love to draft Scoot at 2, right? So, I mean, but don't get me on the whole Hornets doing the thing that's obvious within the context of leverage.
Yeah.
If they want to take Brandon Miller, they need to find a way to extract more value other than just drafting Brandon Miller. And I'm not going to lose sleep if that's the guy they want to draft. It's not what I would personally do, and I wouldn't trade the pick. But if you are going to draft Brandon Miller, you don't need to draft him at number 2.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can I could see them trying to galaxy brain this one way or the other. And it's like, to me, it's just like you have the number 2 pick. This isn't a draft where if you're the Hornets, you have to hope a guy falls to you, or you've got to like scramble and package stuff to try to move up, which is, often not a great decision to make from like a draft capital standpoint. But it's like, all you have to do is just push the button. Like,
Yeah.
Scoot Henderson is gonna be there at 2. Like all you have to do is you just step through. Like it's so you don't need luck. You don't need to wheel and deal. Like the guy is just going to be right there.
But I guess, sorry, BG. I guess my main point is just like, do not draft Brandon Miller at number 2. If you need to have him in for a workout and then float that, oh my God, you love him.
Yeah.
And if you need to send some envelopes full of cash to Jonathan Givoni or whoever you need to and say, yeah, we'd love it if you tweet this. And then call Portland and say, look, here's the deal. In confidence between you and us, if you trade that 3rd pick to a team that really wants Scoot Henderson, we'll make sure they get to 2. We're drafting Brandon Miller. Like,
yeah,
this is, this is the most advantageous situation the Hornets have been in from a franchise in a long time.
Yeah.
And you can't squander it. If Brandon Miller's your guy, fine. But you just can't draft him at 2, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. And like maybe a team like maybe Houston you can kind of go to with something, similar in mind. And it did seem like, it's tough to tell like what is or isn't smoke at this point, including like stuff that's seemingly coming out of Charlotte's camp, which is sort of, has their reputation for, I think, normally being pretty tight, or just like not letting a lot of stuff get out. So, we'll see how that goes. And it does seem like Miller has not, people were saying he was sort of out of shape. And I mean, who knows like how the workouts are going to go. It does seem like that's something that Mitch Kupchak would put, a lot of weight into. And so if Scoot comes in and has just like a monster workout, maybe that's enough to sway it. It kind of feels like you need more than, I don't know. These things should never come down to just like one thing. And I'm not saying it even would in this regard, but perhaps that would be like, if you're really pulling for Scoot to come to Charlotte, like maybe that's one of the things you're sort of banking on.
What do you make from that, BG? Like the whole, because I think it's a very trustworthy report that Brandon Miller's not in shape, but like we haven't been that far removed from basketball. Like, how is he so out of shape already? That just took me back a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's surprising, especially for a guy that's had, in theory, you would have thought the last 8 weeks would have been just him working out. And like he's an older prospect, so you would think maybe there'd be more incentive for him to really like get into killer shape. I'm not sure. Like and it's one of those things. It's just like I don't know. Like who knows? Maybe Brandon Miller is actually in great shape, and he is doing
Right.
or there's someone in the comments saying rumors are that Miller had mono, and if that's true, that sucks, and that would probably explain why his conditioning would be down. So yeah, I can't speculate too much on that because I don't know, but Scooter's the guy that clearly was in very good shape physically. Like he's really bulked up. The long arms, the incredible speed, the body control. I mean, just a really impressive downhill driver. When he puts the whole package together. Someone in the comments, I think it was Adam Price, was saying he doesn't know why Scoot shot so bad from three. His form looks okay. I think like long term, Scoot's gonna like become like a totally passable, if not like good 3-point shooter. I think it's gonna take some time, but he does have like a nice shooting base. You see it when he gets to his pull up looks. You've seen it from the free throw line, and there are moments where he gets going as like a pull up shooter from deep or a step back shooter from deep, where you can see like you can see the outline of a guy who really would have sort of like off dribble pull up shooting to 20 whatever feet away from the hoop. And if assuming that becomes a part of his game, then like I mean, I think he's going to be an awesome player no matter what. But like, if he has like really big growth as like a pull-up shooter, all of a sudden teams can't just go under those screens. Man, he's going to be really tough to stop in the NBA because his athleticism is so good, and he's really, really good at throwing live dribble pocket passes and other bounce passes, not to just like open guys, but into tight windows. And I think he does a really nice job passing around the basket, kind of like throwing guys open into space, getting in the air, drawing a second defender, and then dropping it down. It just feels like Mark Williams would feast on drop-off passes from Scoot Henderson. But I do think with some slight tweaks, and I would think in an NBA system, maybe some better shot selection too. Like all of a sudden, you're going to weed out some of the worst shots that he's taking. That's going to bump up the percentage a little bit. Then with some tweaks as he becomes a more fluid shooter, a stronger athlete, then it's going to bump up, even further here. All right, from this point on, I mean, I feel like we've talked a lot about Scoot on this pod going back to the last few months, or really going back to last fall. Now, do you want to talk at all about Miller, or is there anything else, Spencer, you'd like to bring up on Scoot or Scoot versus Miller?
Yeah, the last thing I would say about Scoot is really just considering his age, considering how explosive of an athlete he is, just freakish athlete. Like he's still at the age where like that he's just going to lean into that. He's been able to get away with that, even obviously even playing for elite and before elite. Like he's going to have to learn the rest of the game. And when he gets to the NBA level and he sees NBA defenses that can really load up on him and show him the athletes that are going to take that away from him, to your point, he's going to learn to become a better shooter. But it's just not fair for a guy that's this young and this athletic to already be able to do that stuff, because he's never had to do it, and for good reason. Like there's never been a reason for him to really, hone that part of his basketball skills. I don't look at his shot, BG, and see something that suggests he can't become a good shooter.
No, I agree. I think small tweaks and just like the natural progression that comes with more reps in age, I think he's gonna totally find water as a shooter. You touched on this briefly with regards to Miller and playing in Alabama's system. I do kind of want to touch on that because I watched a lot of Bama this year, and in the last week or so, I've watched probably a handful more like full Alabama games. He was, and look, like all credit, I think Miller would have been awesome, regardless of system, right? He's a big time prospect, long wing who can shoot. There's some self creation to his game. He shoots off the move. Pretty good defender.
Like even at Virginia, you think he would have been like a lottery
Yeah,
prospect?
I do. I mean, I think he would have been like, he would have had like a Trey Murphy like season. You know what I mean? But
Right,
maybe
right.
they get him some more pin down shooting, and he would, and blocker mover, and when they get to the motion off the inside triangle stuff, and he can really shoot off movement. Alabama featured that a lot, and that sort of like brings me to my point that like, again, I think he was a big time prospect regardless of system, but he was also playing in the best possible scenario at Alabama this season. Like this doesn't have to factor into the in terms of, I should say, in terms of like on the court two-way scheme, this was a good fit for him. He often got to play power forward minutes when they would go small, and put Nick Pringle or Noah Clowney at center, or put Bediako keep him at center and take one of the other fours off, and let Miller get to cook against guys that he has some sort of like athletic advantage over. There were lots of nice, nothing that's not exactly like NBA splitting the atom type movement sets, but just like good movement sets where you'd see Brandon Miller, he'd set a back screen, a rip screen, and then come off a handoff, right? And you get that like good movement, screen the screener shooting, and he's awesome shooting off of that stuff. He is not like a Jordan Hawkins type, like explosive, big, gets 4 feet off the court or whatever. Like he's not a huge leaper shooting off movement or shooting off the catch, but he has such a high release, a quick release that he can shoot it over length, he can shoot it over contest, he can shoot it off movement, he can shoot it from really, really deep. Like there's no reason to not buy this guy's, to buy the shot. Like it's big time, even if he isn't like again, sort of like a Hawkins, just like nuclear, speed guy coming off screens and pin downs and just jumping above a contest. He kind of does it more using his length, and I should say Scoot actually has a pretty high release point as well with that wingspan of his own. So that probably bodes well for him long term. But also Alabama's defensive scheme. This is a team that switched a lot, and I think that's probably good for him to kind of get those types of reps if it matters at all. But you got to see some screen navigation from Miller. They would drop Bediako on a lot of ball screens, who's the sort of, more ground bound center. If Clowney was in at 5, he would drop sometimes, or they would, again, there was a lot of switching in their scheme too. But there's just been a lot of talk about like when people make the Miller versus Paul George comp, which we talked about a little bit last week, Spencer, just sort of like why that type of comparison can be fraught. It feels like we do glaze over the defensive part of that comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just talk about 6'9" shot maker, which like that's hard enough to project, mind you. But like I think Brandon Miller is like a nice defender, but like I don't necessarily see him as being like an all NBA defensive, that kind of defender, that kind of screen navigator. I think he has the ability to be like very disruptive, and you can see him like challenge and be present in passing lanes. He really uses his length well. Even when he's one pass away, like he's in good position, he's got his arms out, and he competes really, really hard for rebounds and loose balls. Like he wants it. Like he competes hard defensively. But
it's the marginal things, right? Like,
yeah,
I think the guy plays hard on defense is what you're saying. And I watched enough Alabama last year to know exactly what you're talking about. But, Alabama was not built to be a 24-second defensive team. They were built to be first to the floor, first to loose balls, pressure the ball a lot, trap when they could, these kind of things. And off the ball, it was kind of a lazy system. And I get I get exactly what you're saying, what you're getting at. To be a great NBA defender, you've got to be committed to do it for the entirety of possessions.
Mm-hmm.
And we did not see enough of that from Brandon Miller last year. Does he have the capability to do it? Absolutely. Of course he does. I mean, he's got all the physical tools, the athleticism. I think he can get a little stronger, obviously. But yeah, there is no evidence on film that this is a guy that's going to guard consistently. Certainly in year one,
Mm-hmm.
but I agree with you. I don't think it projects long term. To add to that, the next layer would be, pairing your first line of defense, LaMelo Ball, with Brandon Miller, who's going to have to guard the best wing on the other team on a lot of nights. With whatever the roster, the rest of the roster looks like next year, is a recipe for another bottom 5 defense with Steve Clifford as the head coach. And that sounds like a bad recipe to me.
To be fair, you could probably say something similar to Scoot and LaMelo defensive backcourt that does that in year one. Certainly doesn't ring of being good, but I don't know. I just want at this point, I just want good habits from them defensively next season. I think they'll be probably not a very good defense. Maybe Mark Williams makes a huge jump, and with PJ still around, and depending on who they draft or whatever, maybe there's some sort of mini leap. They certainly played well defensively the second half or the back third of the season, post All-Star break. But for me, I just care because they're young, and because I don't think they're a year away. I think they're multiple years away. I just want habits from them long term.
I guess I'm more comfortable with Scoot coming in and being a little bit more committed to the dirty work than I would be Brandon Miller. And I don't even know how to exactly describe that or measure it or calculate it, but I guess number one is the expectation. If you put a 6'9" wing next to LaMelo Ball, who's 6'7", you're like, oh, well, there's a skeleton here of a decent defensive team. The opposite is you put a 6'2" Scoot Henderson, with LaMelo Ball. There's less expectation, but I think that has a more ability to punch above its weight than. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, no. Lee was talking about this earlier, but I think. I do think Scoot can get there defensively, guarding at the point of attack. Off the ball, he can still be a little jumpy, but with that 6'9" wingspan, man, again, I was watching this game against the Memphis Hustle from a couple of months ago, and he blocked I can't remember if it was LaRavia or Zaire Williams at the rim. He got beaten and then recovered to block the shot. He does a nice job applying the length, and you could say that about I guess about Miller, but it's not like he was a stocks machine in Alabama's system this season. I think he had very sort of modest. I think he was 2.5%. Right around 2.5%. It wasn't some sort of outlier, ridiculous numbers in those regards. Miller's playmaking is interesting to me, and I'd kind of like to actually get some of your thoughts on that, because there are a lot of positives because of his size, because of his shooting. There's some stuff to play off of, right? Because he should, in theory, be able to, whether he's coming off a ball screen or curling off a down screen, the thought should be, well, he might have to force someone to put 2 on the ball. And he can see the skip pass, or he can see over the top and hit guys on the roll. He's able to sort of access some of those tough passes because of his size. He can pass with either hand, which I think is interesting. And I do like his playmaking, coming off movement. Again, I don't see him yet as a guy that you just run, a couple dozen pick and rolls with per game, and that's going to be the foundation for an offense. I think part of the sell with him is that's part of it, or that's a huge part of it. I'm not sure. But I do kind of like some of the stuff he does coming off of screens and hitting the outlet guys, or hitting guys on the roll, hitting guys on the pop, or, keeping it for a dribble or two, forcing the help, then making the read. He has a really nice left-handed hesitation move. And that's one of the probably one of the best methods he has for getting downhill, like rejecting a screen or like sort of like using that lefty hang dribble to fake the pull up or the step back and then to cross over and get downhill. He struggled finishing at the rim in the half court. He was under 40% this season. He is not like an incredible like leaper. And again, I sort of talked about that with regards to his jumper, but his finishing at the rim improved as the season went along. So that definitely did get a little bit better. Has the ability to, I think, to sort of like settle for tough shots. I think that's something that will improve as he continues to play more and more basketball. Same with his decision making, which in general just probably needs to get better. But I do sort of worry. Like I like the passing. I like the movement shooting. I like his ability to use both hands. But I think you can crowd him and pressure him as a dribble. I don't see him as this like incredible, manipulator of pick and roll coverages like Scoot has been flashing for 2 seasons now. Maybe not in terms of manipulation, but just his ability to like shred a defense with a ball screen. And so I just sort of worry about Miller's ability to finish at the rim in the half court. Like I don't think any of the rim pressure concerns you already have with LaMelo, like I don't think Miller like long term is sort of like fixing those. So I don't know. Any other thoughts here on Miller before we maybe start to close up shop and wrap this thing up?
Well, I think you made good points. And the one thing when I watch Miller, I mean, let me back up. My favorite part about him is his ability to get to his left hand and finish with relative ease and efficiency. With both hands, obviously, but to be able to do that going both sides down the lane line is a huge benefit to a player. I mean, it's a great place to build from, right? I look at his ability to catch and attack quickly. Of course, he has the ability to do it, but we haven't seen it very much from him. We didn't see it at Alabama. LaMelo and Miller remind me of each other in terms of they catch and they have to survey first. And a lot of what we saw from Brandon Miller at Alabama is that when he catches, even in, I think, a pretty advantageous situation where he could get at least a foot into the lane and make a play from there, he defers to the ball screen coming first, right? And to play out of that. I'm uncertain of how quickly he's going to play offensively. And that's what I think really makes good offenses in this league now is being able to play quickly and make quick decisions. And he's super, super talented. And again, I like him as a prospect. And I think he's going to score a lot of points every season in the NBA. But I don't read him as a quick decision maker. And if I'm putting someone next to LaMelo Ball, considering the advantageous situations that a dynamic player and scorer such as Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller, one of the traits I'd really be looking at is how quickly they can attack that situation. And I think Scoot, and you made this point really good on the last pod, is like his ability to attack and break down a defense and just break through the wall and put the defense into multiple rotations almost in the blink of an eye. There's nobody else like him in this draft. And number of drafts. Brandon Miller's not that guy. And not to say he's not a good player, not a good scorer, but there's something I don't love about LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller fit.
Yeah. I can see why some see it as like natural because it's guard with the shot making wing. But, I think below the surface, there are some things, including the rim pressure concerns. Like I know there are some, including some people whose opinions of the draft or the Hornets that I would consider to be pretty darn good that see Miller as a guy that can be a rim pressure person. I know I could be flat wrong about that. I just don't see it quite yet.
Last thing I would say, BG, is I think to unlock, Brandon Miller, his ultimate ceiling, I do think that a team needs to be able to play very, very fast. And in the NBA, that becomes harder Well, number one, because you have less seconds to work with, right? Number two, you can't quite play as aggressively defensively as Alabama like to play. You can do that in college basketball. You can't do that in the NBA. And so, the old adage, like the game slows down, and I think Brandon Miller is going to have a real learning curve when the game slows down. That's kind of the guy that I see. And with Scoot Henderson, yeah, he's going to make a ton of dumb mistakes. I mean, he's going to have so many turnovers, right? This rookie year, just being a Tasmanian devil going to the rim. But ultimately, that probably is going to develop into something more clear cut, in my opinion, than a Brandon Miller. And they're very, very different players and athletes. But that's just kind of my early read looking at the tape.
Yeah. Again, I like Miller a lot. I come out a little bit lower in terms of evaluating his athleticism, evaluating his handle. And while the passing is good, I don't think it's like, it's just not enough to like sway me. And I already think Scoot is a really good passer with 2 years of, professional experience under his belt. He's also 18 months younger than Brandon Miller too. So, and the last thing I would say too, Scoot took a lot of pull-up shots this season, and obviously that's not in a vacuum. That's not great. Like, you do want Scoot to be. You would like him to have had 40% of his shots this year in the G League at the rim, as opposed to somewhere in the 30s or whatever. He shot an okay number. It was around 63% in the regular season for the G League. It's not bad. With like 2/3 of those coming assisted. I do think the pull-up shooting, though, like that type of shot versatility, taking a lot of shots that are in the 15 to 20 foot range, or the 10 to 15 or 10 to 20 range, like however you want to like split those zones of the floor, that is the kind of scoring that Nate Oates doesn't have a lot of that in the offense at Alabama, where they're all dunks and threes. And it was something that was very different for G League Ignite, which as a team wide took a ton of mid-range shots this season. But like that is also like the domain of the star scorer. And so I think the fact that like Scoot already looks like a guy that can give you some mid-range scoring with that athleticism, with the playmaking, and then when the shot does improve, and teams aren't just able to like duck under screens and sort of try to like goad him into settling for some of those pull-up shots and not attacking downhill when the lanes are there. I just see him to be a guy that can be like a really special offensive player at the on the next level. So, Spencer, any last thoughts here? If not, I'll go ahead and close this out.
Yeah, very quickly, and then close this out. I would just say, diehard Hornets fans, if you're listening to this, you're a diehard Hornets fan or a diehard NBA fan. Just don't forget, it's very possible that it's agreed upon that this franchise is going to be sold before the draft. And I think it's fair to assume that MJ was waiting to see how the lottery played out, obviously for valuation purposes, before signing on the dotted line. So the narrative's going to change a lot, right? And that's just before we get too wrapped up in this. They like Brandon Miller more than they like Scoot. There's a lot that can change for the Charlotte Hornets and who's making the ultimate calls before the draft gets here.
Yeah, and it should be noted, like still several weeks to go, Gavoni said he thought it was 60-40 Miller. So it's not like that's just one man sort of, read of the room, temperature check. But, that streaks, that seems more coin flip than it is like a certainty, right? At least at this stage. But who knows? You can't put too much stock in that stuff. And look, like Spencer said, was sort of just kind of hinting at, this is going to be a really busy offseason for the Hornets. The draft is going to be big. Who knows, potential in ownership, a sale and ownership change, the restricted free agency of PJ Washington, the possible LaMelo Ball, fun max, as Brian Windhorst likes to say, those extension talks likely to start to, if it's not already settled, but sort of something that's going to become more of a focal point of the offseason. something we've discussed plenty in this podcast, something we will continue to talk about more, especially as the draft approaches. So lots of stuff the next couple of weeks, at least, all the way through summer league, and if not further. So thanks again for joining us today. As always, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, where I get my podcast. Visit buzzbeat.substack.com for information about our private podcast feed, where you can get ad-free episodes and early access, along with some other bonus content. So for Lee, who had to duck out of here earlier, for Spencer, thank you again for being here, and Richie for producing this as always. This is Brian. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, go Hornets.